Colleagues, good morning. Thank you so much for joining. Feel free to share your name and where you're joining us from in the chat. Hello again. My name is Christine Samaru, and I'm the co-lead for the Human Rights Working Group as part of the Caribbean Climate Justice Alliance. And this training is a collaboration between CANARI, FEMA, the Bradford Collective, and the Stronger Caribbean Together Network. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us for our first capacity building session with Caribbean civil society on the Escazu Agreement. This training is an integral part of our regional campaign, Caribbean Perspectives on Escazu, Our Rights, Our Future. Last year, and many of you have been joining us for all our events. Last year, we launched a campaign with speakers across the Caribbean. And last November, we centered the Escazu Agreement on Human Rights Day. Both events are available for viewing on our YouTube page. As we enter into the second phase, our focus is on engaging human rights centered civil society across the Caribbean and build their capacity to understand how the Escazu Agreement intersects with their work and their mission. Additionally, we aim to continue amplifying human rights impact stories and narratives of environmental defenders across the Caribbean. While the Escazu Agreement holds significance, it has not been ratified by all Caribbean nations. Countries are at varying stages of signing, ratifying, and complying with the agreement. And furthermore, the Escazu Agreement remains relatively unknown to many citizens and civil society. There is a pressing need for regional collaboration and capacity building to support the creation of the necessary institution and legal framework for its effective implementation. To strengthen this effort, raising awareness and educating citizens and civil society is crucial, ensuring that they are equipped to push for its robust implementation. Across the region, individuals and collectives, however, have already been applying the principles of Escazu within their own context. Our goal is to provide the skills and resources needed to maximize the potential of this agreement, continuing to promote the lives of environmental defenders and safeguarding the environment. This campaign has been a platform for all our work we have been involved with in our respective country. It is crucial for us to understand how interconnected this agreement is with your work and your interests. And when action, the Escazu Agreement provides us with the tools we need to fight for justice, human rights, and environmental sustainability. Whether we are addressing gender justice, migration, indigenous rights, deep sea mining, the agreement speaks to transparency. It is fundamental about protecting both people and the planet. And one of the most critical and transformative elements of the Escazu Agreement is its implicit protection of environmental defenders. For the first time in history, we have a legally binding document that guarantees protection for those on the front line of environmental defense. Governments that ratify the agreement are required to establish safe and enabling conditions for environmental defenders and to ensure that those who are threatened or harmed are held accountable. This morning, I'm so grateful for your involvement. Our session will take approximately 90 minutes. And during that time, we will hear and interact with three dynamic speakers who will be able to deepen our understanding of the Escazu Agreement. We will begin with Ms. Danielle. I'm not sure if she's able to join us. Can someone tell me if she's here? It's okay. We'll come back to her. We'll start with Miss Kate, who is joining us from St. Lucia, and she'll be able to share St. Lucia's experience with the implementation of this agreement. Ms. Kate Wilson is a legal officer in the Department of Sustainable Development in St. Lucia. And we'll be also spending some time with Ms. Nicole, the executive director of CANARI and also the elected representative of the public for the Escazu Agreement, and she's based in Trinidad and Tobago. She will be speaking on the role of civil society in national implementation of the Escazu Agreement. And we will reflect with Ms. Danielle on the environment in terms of her experience with developing national plans on the Escazu Agreement, and she is based in Jamaica. I really appreciate your time here this morning, and I welcome interaction and questions from you. After each speaker, we'll pause and we'll be able to interact with the audience. We know how necessary this agreement is, and we know based on your work, you're already doing the necessary work. So learning more about this agreement will only enhance what you're already doing. So I welcome Kate. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'll hand the floor over to you.
Thank you very much, and I want to say good morning to everyone. And as I try to upload my presentation here, just let me know when you can see it.
We're seeing your files.
Oh, you see my files.
So I see in our chat, there are people joining us from across the Caribbean, Trinidad and Tobago, Dominica. Thank you so much. Suriname is in the house. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate. And we have Grenada, and Danielle is here. So Kate,
Danielle is here?
Yes. So I know
okay, so
that
maybe Danielle can go ahead while I find mine.
Yes. Sure. So Danielle, welcome. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. I know you're joining us 1 hour early. So I just did the intro and I will hand the floor over to you because I know you do have to leave a bit
Okay,
early.
so I'll stop sharing.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Christine. Good morning, everyone. Apologies for being a tad late. Let me share my screen.
As you've started to share, but we're not able to see this yet. Okay, it's here. It's on full screen.
Okay. Good morning again. So I'm Danielle Andrade Goffe. I'm an attorney based in Jamaica, and I'm going to be speaking to you a bit about the roadmap for the implementation of the Escazu Agreement. It's essentially a process that has been initiated by the parties to the Escazu Agreement, and it's a blueprint to help guide countries to implement the Escazu Agreement. It's not an implementation plan. It's the blueprint so they can actually develop an implementation plan for the Escazu Agreement. I'm sure Christine has already explained the Escazu Agreement, and many of you people on this call are also familiar with the Escazu Agreement, but I have a slide here which I just think it's good to set the tone, give a little background information so you understand the essence of where the roadmap is coming from. So the Escazu Agreement, it's a regional treaty between Latin American and Caribbean countries. And it's essentially a treaty that encourages countries to grant certain rights to the public. And these rights are procedural rights, but they're rights that are based in ensuring environmental protection. So the Escazu Agreement encourages countries to grant the right of access to environmental information, the right to participate in environmental decisions, the right to have access to justice in environmental matters. And there are also articles in the treaty that seek to protect environmental defenders, which are those persons who, in the course of seeking to protect the environment, oftentimes they do it peacefully, but they are persecuted, oppressed, intimidated, attacked in the course of doing their work. And there's also an article on capacity building and one on cooperation. It's important to note about this treaty, it's an environmental democracy treaty. So it's really about empowering people to be able to do their work, which is to protect the environment or live their livelihoods. The treaty also has an article which guarantees the right to a healthy environment. There are 17 parties to the agreement, and eight of those parties are actually Caribbean countries, which is pretty significant because it's pretty balanced from a regional perspective between Latin America and Caribbean countries. Now, the roadmap itself, there was a decision that was taken at the third conference of the parties in Santiago in April last year, where the parties decided that they would develop, with the support of ECLAC, which is the secretariat for the treaty, plans and roadmaps for the national implementation of the Escazu Agreement. And they actually set a timeline for which they needed to do that, which was no later than 2026 or 2 years after the treaty entered into force in the country. What's significant about this is that in keeping with the essence of the Escazu Agreement, which focuses on a participatory process, the process for developing the roadmaps, the parties agreed that it should include the significant participation of the public, indigenous peoples, and local communities. There are resources that have been developed by ECLAC, which can support the development of these roadmaps. There's an observatory on Principle 10, which is a database that includes all the laws, policies, and cases related to these particular environmental rights that are in the countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. And then there's an implementation guide for the Escazu Agreement, which is on the website. And there's also several publications, but one in particular I'm highlighting here, Ensuring Environmental Access Rights in the Caribbean, which analyzes cases coming out of the Caribbean related to access rights. So these are some examples of roadmap publications that you can find on ECLAC's website. Quite a few countries already have completed roadmaps. This is just a few of them that I'm showing you on the screen. St. Lucia was the first Caribbean country that completed their roadmap. Belize has completed theirs, but theirs has not been published as yet. And Grenada and St. Kitts are in the process now of developing their roadmaps. So these are all available on ECLAC's website if you're interested in looking at it. The essence and the objective of the roadmap is to have a transparent and participatory process that allows for developing actions for ensuring the effective implementation of the Escazu Agreement that takes into account national capacities. So one of the main things to highlight in terms of the methodology to do this is that it's not, even though I'm a consultant with ECLAC that worked with some of the Caribbean countries to produce these roadmaps, ECLAC and myself, we didn't sit in a silo, a vacuum, and just drafted this roadmap. It's a collaborative process. We worked very closely with the focal points and other government entities. In all of the countries, some sort of steering committee was created to support and oversee the process. In a few of the countries, the steering committee included civil society. Sorry. And we, other aspects of the methodology, we did desk reviews to obtain information on the national framework related to access rights. So looking at the laws, policies, and practices. And then we had stakeholder consultations to provide input on the status of access rights and to get persons' recommendations as well on what they felt should be priority actions for the implementation plan. That picture you see on your screen was from the St. Lucia workshop that was held last year to gain input from stakeholders on the roadmap. And Kate, I'm sure, is going to go into detail more on that. So the roadmap has 8 steps. So if you pick up one of the roadmap publications, you will see these 8 chapters outlining these various topics. There's a baseline assessment, which is step 1. And essentially, this is an assessment of what are the laws, policies, and practices that are related to these specific articles of the Escazu Agreement. So we did that sort of analysis to understand what is the status quo that exists in countries, and then we compared it with the specific articles of the Escazu Agreement to identify where there are any gaps in terms of what the countries did not have that was required by the Escazu Agreement. And maybe there were areas also where countries were more progressive than what the Escazu Agreement required. So we also noted those. And the idea behind this was to develop recommendations to ensure that the national framework, the laws in particular and policies, were more aligned with the articles of the Escazu Agreement. And these are not all the articles of the Escazu Agreement. These are just the ones we focused on because these are the main articles, the ones that, if you want to call it the meat, the substance of the agreement. Second step was a stakeholder mapping exercise that was done. So the roadmap publication in the second section of it will include a stakeholder explanation of a stakeholder mapping exercise that was done. And it was important to do this to identify all the relevant stakeholders who are directly influenced or influential in the process of implementing any specific action related to the Escazu Agreement, fulfilling or complying with the Escazu Agreement. And we group these stakeholders by private sector, civil society, academia, trade unions, media, and public authorities. In some countries, we even disaggregate civil society organizations to look at indigenous peoples. So, for example, in Belize, we did that. And also for other countries, we looked as not just at environmental civil society organizations, but civil society organizations that also represent persons or groups in vulnerable situations. So maybe the poor or the elderly. We also highlighted those stakeholders. Steps 3 and 4 of the roadmap is the interinstitutional coordination and the governance system. So naturally, there needs to be, you can't just write an implementation plan and expect that it's going to be executed. There are various actors that are involved. You've identified in the stakeholder mapping exercise some key actors, but we also, through the stakeholder mapping, identified some core actors. On the side of the public authority, we were looking at those stakeholders who who had key roles and functions to play to implement the Escazu Agreement. So for example, if we were looking at the area of access to information, we identified in a country, oh, there's an information commissioner who's responsible for handling complaints, or an ombudsman who handles complaints. That's a key core entity. We identified, for example, the Ministry of Legal Affairs, who would be responsible for issues relating to access to justice. We identified entities who have key roles and functions relating to public participation. In many countries, this happened to be an environmental or planning authority. So all of those entities, we identified those core public authorities because it is necessary for them to be able to coordinate their work in order to implement the Escazu Agreement. A key role for that interinstitutional coordination, and a key first step, of course, is the goal of developing that actual implementation plan. The other thing that we wanted to also identify, and this goes towards the governance system, are other actors, members of the public, stakeholders, who have who have integral roles and functions relating to access rights. So in many of the countries, these happen to be environmental organizations, but we also wanted to include other actors who are oftentimes directly impacted by environmental decisions, and maybe even they have played a role in advocating for environmental protection. So we looked at indigenous peoples groups. We also looked at persons and groups in vulnerable situations as key stakeholders, and private sector. There are many facets of private sector. There are, for example, associations, membership associations for lawyers, engineers, architects, planners, media even, although you might consider media not necessarily private sector, but these are all different actors and stakeholders who we felt it was important to include in a mechanism for participating in developing the implementation plan. The key aspect of this is that in having a process of involving those stakeholders, they would be able to help with monitoring, holding the government accountable to developing and the implementation plan, providing feedback and recommendations for the implementation plan. They would also be able to assist in outreach, part of the dissemination campaigns and Escazu Agreement, serving as an information channel between their organization, their networks, and members. Now, what type of mechanism allows for these various actors to work together? That's something that countries had to discuss and work on. In some countries, they already had existing committees, and they created subcommittees under those committees. So like they had a human rights committee, or like an interinstitutional committee that worked on SDGs. And what they did is that they created some committees under those committees to focus on the Escazu Agreement, and they included civil society representatives on those committees. What should be the number? And then in some cases, multi-stakeholder advisory groups were created to work with the committee. So that working group, or those multi-stakeholder advisory working groups, would allow for a broader number of stakeholders. So not just representatives of different stakeholders, but a broader group. Stakeholders, so countries had to think of the number and categories of stakeholders that they wanted to include at these various levels. So whether it's at the interinstitutional coordination level, that core body working on developing the implementation plan, because as I mentioned before, Some countries decided they wanted to include civil society on that core body, or whether it's the broader group of the wider group of stakeholders who may serve more of an advisory role, providing feedback towards the implementation, development of the implementation plan. Deciding the number and categories of stakeholders is something that countries had to do. And then what is the method of convening stakeholders? So in some countries, there would be an open call. So there would be a dissemination campaign, an outreach campaign to educate the public about this process, what was happening, and the members of the public would be invited to register their interest in being a part of the governance system of whatever mechanism it would be called. And from the persons that have registered their interest, then they would decide on, okay, we'll group them in categories. We will decide the categories of stakeholders will then select their representative who would then serve on the core body, or they would decide how they wanted to do the method of selection from there. Aside from open call, some countries also had selected invitations as a way they wanted to select, agree on the members or the stakeholders rather to be a part of the process. You find that in Caribbean countries that, you know, it's often the same groups working on the same issues. Everybody knows everybody in the civil society space. So it's not unfathomable that you could have a process of selecting the persons who you want to be on the stakeholders, because everybody knows who these persons are. They're at the same meetings. They're part of several different consultative bodies. But there was a decision about whether to do the open call or selecting. Steps 5, 6, and 7. So I'm just going to talk about these together. So this is the information and participation strategy, participatory activities, and priority actions. So countries, sorry, countries had to develop in the roadmap an information and participatory strategy. So this aspect, which is, remember, this is now the blueprint for developing the Escazu Agreement. This is now where countries had to say, in the course of me preparing and developing this Escazu implementation plan, how am I going to ensure that I'm disseminating information, doing the necessary outreach, and ensuring that persons can participate in this process of developing the implementation plan? And so that's what the information participation strategy spoke to. It spoke to things that are key in the Escazu Agreement, like making sure information is understandable, comprehensible, making sure that information is disseminated early, making sure that persons are particularly persons and groups in vulnerable situations, that the methods of dissemination is culturally appropriate, and then recommending a range of different ways to consult people, because you can't consult everyone the same way. So for the roadmap, there could be a slew of different ways in which you could consult persons, and all of these could be done because they would be targeting different people. So whether it be online surveys, focus groups, community meetings, town halls, a wealth of different ways in which you can consult people and involve them in the process of developing the Escazu implementation plan, because you want to get the feedback from the public and you want to let them know what's happening as you're developing the Escazu implementation plan. So those are the key aspects of it, and the priority actions now. So there are a few priority actions that the roadmap identifies. In the course of doing the baseline assessment, there were some key gaps that were noted, which were highlighted and recommendations were made. But then at the national stakeholder workshop, stakeholders were invited to review those recommendations and add to it as well. So the roadmap kind of gives you an idea of what could be priority actions in the implementation plan. And in no way is it saying that these have to be the priority actions. It's just giving, recommendations, like a jumpstart, things that countries can consider for inclusion in that plan. Oh, I had a slide on this. So this is explaining what I just said before, which is some of the key things in information and participation strategy. This is an example of a survey that was sent out, just the introduction to it. All right, step 8 now, regional cooperation. So this is the final step, and this step focuses on countries asking themselves, how can our country collaborate with other countries in Latin America and the Caribbean in order to build our capacity to implement the Escazu Agreement? What are some of the strategies? What are some of the opportunities that are there? For us in the Caribbean, there are many different ways we already collaborate on a regional level between UE, OECS, CARICOM. So it's looking at ways that we can work regionally in order to further the objective of implementing the Escazu Agreement. So countries in the roadmap would think through some of those strategies, and you can read them in the roadmap. So that's it. Thank you. I don't know if anybody had any questions that they wanted to ask.
So much. I see in the chat, let's see. Someone was asking for the roadmap from Belize, but we recognize that it hasn't been published as yet.
No.
But also persons who are joining here, this conversation is meant to center your voices. So please feel free to, you can use the chat, or if you want to unmute and speak, please feel free to do so.
Can I say something?
Sure.
I'm trying to understand, states generally don't plan or consider population-specific needs, and they don't consider the micro-level experience, meaning our populations don't live single issues or single identity life, but yet it insists on planning from a macro-level perspective, meaning they build roads, they build bridges, they raise awareness, but they don't think about the economic, social, and cultural rights concerns of populations living in climate vulnerable areas. In fact, it's more convenient to erase them altogether. So how does this agreement work when there are LGBT people that live in the region, but the region refuses to acknowledge them in law? How does this agreement work when LGBT people, specifically for Belize, live in climate vulnerable areas and for the most part, renters of housing, and they experience housing vulnerability? But we're talking about an agreement for everybody when the population does not have any legislative protection at all. How does this work with regards to state psychology, where they believe that it's cheaper to erase our existence in what medium economic development strategy, and the discussion of the Sustainable Development Goals and the 2030 Agenda? How does this work for population-specific people when you just mentioned indigenous is convenient for you, but no mention of the LGBT population? We don't exist. And so I say this within the context of this agreement could work if the psychology of ignorance within the system can be dismantled and actually reflect practices of inclusion rather than practices of oppression. And that has to be acknowledged going further than having awareness, raising awareness, treating us like we all exist as citizens. We don't exist the same way as citizens. If you can't acknowledge that, then you're as complicit by omission, indifference, and inaction in erasing us as well. And I close there.
Thank you so much, Caleb. I really appreciate your intervention. Nicole?
Can I say something? Can I respond?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Sorry, I did not mention LGBTQ as an a group of our persons in vulnerable situations. I didn't in any intention mean to leave out that group. I was just calling off the top of my head examples. But the Escazu Agreement, they have articles. So the whole Escazu Agreement is for the public, right? But the Escazu Agreement recognizes that there are persons and groups in vulnerable situations who may, because of the conditions that exist within their country, they experience particular difficulties exercising these rights. And the agreement doesn't define who they are. It doesn't list them. It doesn't say it's elderly, youth, and full stop. It doesn't list it at all. What the agreement says is that these persons and groups in vulnerable situations is based on the national context. It's based on countries looking and identifying who are those persons and groups who, because of the conditions that exist, they face particular difficulties in exercising these rights. An implementation guide for the Escazu Agreement says it calls on all the countries, you need to do the work of assessing and analyzing who these persons are to understand who needs to experience particular care and attention and support in order to be able to exercise these rights under the agreement. So in, for example, I believe in the Belize Roadmap, one of the recommendations in there, if I'm not mistaken, I don't know if it will make it to the final publication, but one of the recommendations was that Belize should do this type of assessment to identify who are the different persons and groups in vulnerable situations who deserve particular care and attention in order to be able to, and support in order to facilitate their access rights. So I'm hoping that's something that will be done in the course of doing the Escazu Agreement implementation plan. And I call on you and everyone who's aware that this is happening to make your voice heard, to be a part of the process. So, to hold the government accountable so that they do this work of identifying all these groups. So I just wanted to say that.
Let me add, I gone through the VNR. We did a 4-day engagement off and the state ended up eliminating almost everything we were concerned with. So while I recognize the civil and idealistic comments that you've made, the reality is the state find people like me an inconvenient issue that they don't want to address. But with that said, the struggle continues.
Nicole?
Nicole.
Danielle, do you want to share?
Danielle,
Well,
let me just,
Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to jump in to say, to commend Caleb for raising this. It's a really important issue, and thank you for raising it. And to note the importance of respecting the multiple identities people have and the additional vulnerabilities and marginalization. In particular, people with different gender identities and sexual diversity. Caleb, this is something we have talked about in the Caribbean, and it's something I am going to be taking forward. I feel really passionate that this is a really important issue for us to address. It is an uphill battle. The struggle will continue, but it is, I am going to definitely be bringing it forward. And to note, Caleb, that I think it's a good time to press this because the Escazu Agreement has agreed to mainstream gender in the work of the agreement, and they're in the process of thinking about what the structure of a gender action plan would be. And we have already raised concerns on the draft that we have seen, the outline, that it only talks about women. So it's going back to this binary thinking. And so the Caribbean, we've had this discussion before in a previous webinar. It's a really important issue to consider intersectional vulnerabilities of environmental defenders. So just to tell you, we are with you. And I, as a representative, feel passionately this is important. and we'll be taking it up, and feel free to be in touch with me. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing, Nicole. And I know Ms. Danielle has to leave, so I'm going to open the floor if there are any other questions for her specifically before we move on to the next presenter.
Hi, Christine. Hi, I just had a quick comment. How are you doing?
Sure.
Just I wanted to say that I really do applaud Nicole's saying how it would be dealt with, and then Danielle, I loved your presentation when you pointed to the fact that sometimes these general provisions are meant to be with the best will in the world, taken to mean that they can cover a multiplicity of identities, as Caleb said. But what happens often is the opposite. The fact that there is not specific mention of who is vulnerable is complicit in the erasure. And even though it's maybe not meant that way, that's what happens, in the long run with the powers that be, right? So I think that's something we can consider, that things can always be twisted in a way to suit an oppressor. And I think it's really important for us to always bear that in mind when looking at things with the best will in the world. There's always the flip side. So thanks for letting me speak.
Thank you so much for mentioning Stacey. It's so nice to see you. And I do agree with everything that you've said. And I think that's why the space is so necessary, because we need a space for civil society to raise these important issues, because the agreement as it is, it's one aspect, but the reality on the ground is another. So, is there any other questions or comments for the first presenter? Thank you so much, Danielle. We really, really appreciate your insights, and we really appreciate your work. And I know you have to head off to another engagement, but we really appreciate your time. And I'm so grateful for all the feedback and the questions that were presented to you. And I see that you've also provided some additional information for Caleb, specifically in Belize. So thank you so much. And now we'll move forward with our next presenter, all the way from St. Lucia, Ms. Kate Wilson. She'll be speaking about her experience with the implementation plans in St. Lucia.
Good morning, everyone. Again, Christine, actually, when I spoke with you, I got the impression that you wanted me to do an overall presentation of where we were pre-ratification right up to implementation. I have a PowerPoint that deals specifically with the roadmap, but this is not what I was presenting today. I thought it would be more useful for the grouping that we are dealing with to see where we came from and what happened right up to implementation. So this is what I'm going to be sharing today, and I'll try and be as quick as possible. Tell me when you can see my screen.
It's coming up.
I'll put it in the mode.
We can see it.
Yes, you can see it. Okay. So let's go back to the first. Went all the way to the end. Let me go to the first. Okay, so in St. Lucia, what we did, the first thing that we did is that the Department of Sustainable Development, which is where I sit as legal officer, national focal point for the Escazu Agreement, takes the lead on all issues pertaining to the Escazu Agreement on behalf of the government of St. Lucia. So remember, I work for the government. And the St. Lucia National Trust, on behalf of civil society, had already begun working with ECLAC since 2015 through Ms. Coretta Cook-Strauss, who was the alternative representative of the public. St. Lucia joined us at the 7th round of the negotiations of the Escazu Agreement when it was taking place in Buenos Aires. And since then, we actively participated in all efforts, inclusive of all the online webinars and meetings which were held by ECLAC during the formulation of the agreement. So the first thing we did, we formed a public awareness committee. It was formed within the DSD. It was chaired by myself, with representation on that committee from the St. Lucia National Trust, which is civil society, and the Multilateral Environmental Agreement Project Coordinator, because you can see the synergy with climate change, biodiversity, pollution. So we had this lady here, and her project at the time was developing a national environmental information system. So we got her involved on that steering committee. So then, I think I missed correct. So next slide. St. Lucia attended the negotiation in San Jose, Costa Rica, and that culminated in the endorsement and adoption of the Escazu Agreement on the 4th of March 2018. So immediately it was endorsed, we sent out a press release on March 20th to March 5th in terms of all what happened at Escazu. And we also worked very closely with the OACS Commission, because the OACS Commission, their website feeds over 1,000 counterparts throughout Latin America. And we worked closely with them. They put their press release on their website, and it fed throughout Latin America and the Caribbean. We also had radio and television items which were done on this event, and that can be accessed on the Facebook page of the Department of Sustainable Development. We also used extensively our government information service and our national television network. And you can see all what we have done if you go on YouTube and you just Google Escazu, or you Google my name, or you Google the Department of Sustainable Development, and you will see. Also, the St. Lucia National Trust also used their website to publicize. So we had a presentation of the agreement, which was made at the official launch of the National Environment Information System, the NEIS, and we had varied stakeholders, including those vulnerable groups that Caleb just spoke about. We had persons we had elderly persons, we had women and children, we also had persons with disabilities, we had a broad cross-section, and we also did 3 public service announcements, which were produced and they were played at prime time on all the traditional media and social media platforms in St. Lucia. And all of this is available on the Commission, the OACS Commission's press room, as well as on the social media pages of the Department of Sustainable Development. So we had also a robust public awareness campaign. We went through all the traditional media we had on the Daily Buzz, on Choice TV, Monica McCoy, that can be accessed on the Facebook page. We had a Let's Talk program, you can see that on YouTube. We also had news briefs with major television stations throughout the Caribbean with Alex Busque, HTS. We had town hall meetings where we went on the ground in Suffren, the most southern town of St. Lucia. We went through the schools, the infant schools, the primary schools, and we went right up to the secondary school, which is the Upper Risk Community College. We teamed up with the person responsible for sustainable development, the Sustainable Development Goal, Ms. Janelle Vaughan, who prepares St. Lucia's VNR report, Voluntary National Review report. We also teamed up with Foreign Affairs, and there is a group called the National Coordinating Committee on Human Rights, which is a cabinet appointed group. So we linked up with them when they were developing their UPR report, and we had persons from Barbados at the time, Ms. Michelle Brathwaite, who now works at she heads the Human Rights Office in the Bahamas at the moment. But at the time she was in Barbados, she came down to St. Lucia and partnered with us to get this, because remember, the Escazu Agreement is not just an environmental treaty, it is also a human rights instrument. So we teamed up with them. And then you can see in this photo, our Prime Minister at the time signing the Escazu Agreement when it was opened for signature at the treaty's office. Then we developed a concept note. We looked at what the Escazu Agreement was asking. At the time, the Secretariat had not given us an implementation plan, and we did not have a roadmap yet. But what we did at the DSC is that we developed a concept note looking at all the provisions in the Escazu Agreement and came up with that. and that was endorsed by our cabinet conclusion 1440, 14, anyway, I can't remember the number at the moment, but it's somewhere in the slides, and our cabinet approved it. The other things that we did was that we partnered with various groups within the society, because of course the DSD, government alone cannot implement environmental matters. It is cross-cutting in nature, and it involves all stakeholders. So we had an Escazu desk, where there was a public exhibition which was being run. The Department of Commerce every year celebrates November as awareness month for commercial activities. And so we partnered with them. They were having an activity at the town hall, and I decided the committee decided, let us participate. We had a desk, an Escazu desk, and I was the chairperson or the MC for that event. So when persons were passing around, we interviewed them, we asked them to come in and see what the Escazu Agreement was all about and how it relates to commerce in St. Lucia. Then we had our National Independence Parade. St. Lucia celebrates its independence anniversary on the 22nd of February. And there was a national parade. We had a band, we teamed up with the Department of Fisheries. And you will see a photo in the slides showing how we combined with fisheries to bring up to awareness about marine pollution. And that was what we did during the Independence Parade. Then on the 4th of March, 2020, when we celebrated 2019, sorry, when we celebrated the first anniversary of the Escazu adoption, we released a comprehensive video, and that was part of the Escazu Secretariat that asked each country to engage in, have the public engage in short videos, you know, as to what Escazu is all about. And so we had that. And again, if you go on YouTube, you will see that as well. And then we moved on. St. Lucia participated in the third meeting of the Forum of Countries of Latin America in Chile, and that was in 2019. And we also presented the Escazu Agreement at the launch of the National Adaptation Plan and our sectoral plans to show how the Escazu teams in with the UNFCCC and to fight climate change, which is what again Philip asked about. And moving on, St. Lucia, we also had several workshops, and one of the workshops that we had a special workshop in 2020 for the judiciary. And I must say, and I'm going to keep saying this, on Saturday, the Chief Justice showed up with her Chief Magistrate, her judges, and her masters in full force. And we had discussions with them on access rights. We also had a webinar for the workers' union as well, and they themselves also turned out in large numbers. We had also for the Bar Association, well, we spoke with the lawyers themselves. They themselves also turned out in large numbers. We did one for the media as well, and there are several others that we will continue to do because, of course, we cannot do everything all at once. And then St. Lucia, we went to the first meeting of signatory countries to the agreement held in Costa Rica in November 2019. We also teamed up with the biodiversity groups. And you find that the schools during the summer holidays, they have summer camps. So we infiltrated those summer camps to teach the kids from, you know, in those, we went to the library, we went to the summer camps in the fields to teach them about the Escazu Agreement and how it teams up with biodiversity. Then we went, as I said, okay, I said that we had also gone to the tertiary level to introduce to them the online course on the Escazu Agreement. You know that the Secretariat has an online course. If you go on the Secretariat's website, you will see that. So we introduced that to the tertiary and to the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College, which runs, there is a course which is run on sustainable development by Professor Marie-Louise Felix, and she carries on a very hands-on course, and she said she incorporates that online course into into a program. Then we also wanted to deal with, St. Lucia has a second language. St. Lucia has its Creole language. So we went on the Creole programs, Zafé Nou Osetlisi, which is our business in St. Lucia, where we spoke with the Creole hosts, Jaim and Yadi. And that was, and of course, we had Creole translation for those who do not understand the Creole language, which was provided by Primus Hutchinson, which is the Creole producer, who was at the time the Creole producer of the Government Information Service. That, again, you can access on the Facebook page of the MBC television station. Okay, and let me go quickly, I don't want to take too much time here. And then we began to focus on ratification. The DSD, what we did is that we spoke with Miguel Fevrier, who then again was doing a program called Off Script at the MBC program, and we teamed up with him to bring the message again. Then we teamed up with Danielle and women, where a program was called Ratification, Women in Defense of Human Rights and Nature, and that was done on September 23rd, 2020. Again, you can access that on YouTube. The Bar Association called us. They have a newsletter called The Briefing, and they featured the Escazu Agreement on that on the program, and that was in September of 2020. The World Resources Institute also had a launch called Advancing the Escazu Agreement and Climate Justice in the Caribbean, and we again teamed up with them to ensure that the message was out there. Then, of course, as I said, the cabinet memo was prepared, submitted to the minister, and here we have cabinet conclusion number 1447 of 2020, where cabinet endorsed the Escazu Agreement. So then we had ratification of the Escazu Agreement, and then that was effected on December 2nd, 2022, and again, all the relevant parties were informed. And apart from the government efforts, the St. Lucia National Trust, as I said at the time, Coretta Cooks-Charles was the person at the St. Lucia National Trust, and she had her own Escazu activities going on despite her collaboration with the DSD. She had a special edition of Our Heritage entitled Caribbean Women Advocating for Better Environmental Governance. And there you will see Danielle, myself, and a number of women across the Caribbean talking on that. And you can see that on the Facebook page of the St. Lucia National Trust, as well as the DSD, you just Google. Then we developed a number of materials, such as poster boards, banners, bookmarks, brochures, and both ECLAC and the St. Lucia National Trust, we collaborated, and that was used in our public awareness. Then we had the OECS Commission. The OECS Commission signed an MOU for 2 to 3 years to collaborate with the Escazu Agreement. And we had the head of oceans at the OECS Commission, Mr. David Robin. We had Mr. Chamberlain Emmanuel. We had Danielle, Janelle Gabriel, and all those persons have worked, as well as Susanna DeVorville, who works in oceans and marine governance. So we teamed up to show how the importance of the Escazu Agreement, not just to the environment, but also to the governance of the oceans. And then we came to the implementation of the roadmap, where we worked closely with Danielle, and I'm sure Christine, at some point, we will have the opportunity to go step by step with how we developed that roadmap and where we are at now. But then that roadmap was completed. It was endorsed at COP3 in Chile. We had our baseline assessment done. We had our stakeholder mapping. Our governance structure was also done. Our information and participation strategy. The other thing that we did is, in terms of regional cooperation, we teamed up with UN Women. We teamed up with WICAN International, with Osprey. Again, you can Google and see all the work that we've done with Osprey, with the UNDRR, with UNDP. In fact, UNDP, Ms. Good, did a profile on St. Lucia where she did all the work that we've done. And again, if you go on the UNDP website, you will find that. And we have participated in the human rights defenders in Ecuador and the one in Panama, and we are just getting ready for the third, which is to take place in St. Kitts Nevis. And I must announce that we are expecting to have the Committee to Support Implementation and Compliance visiting St. Lucia just ahead of that third forum. They will be in St. Lucia on the 3rd and the 4th of April, and we are in full swing with our plans to welcome them. And so that in a nutshell, let me just show you some of the photos that we have. This is us here in Costa Rica, where at the, the Escazu table where it was endorsed. Here you can see Danielle and Danielle right here, that is members of the public. We also have, well, you can see myself flanked by Trinidad and St. Vincent. I'm some of the delegates, and you can see the Escazu Secretariat in the background. Again, the Escazu team here, and this is where we teamed up. We remember I told you that we were part of that Independence Day parade. We had that exhibition here where we teamed up with fisheries to show parade marine, to bring awareness to marine pollution. So that's myself here and our little float. I also went to Sweden. We were asked to come to Sweden to talk about the Escazu Agreement through the China dialogue and I forgot the name of that organization, but it is Claudia Lima was the one. I think the human rights. I forgot the name of that body. But together they invited us here, and you can see me here flanked with David Boyd, who is the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights, where we were discussing the Escazu Agreement. And at least from a Caribbean perspective, a Latin American perspective. Here, this is Coretta Cook-Schultz, the person that I spoke about. She was at COP1, they're talking about civil society and the role of the Lucia National Trust as the elected alternate representative of the public. And of course, these are all the heads of state at the time when the Escazu Agreement was signed at the Treaties Office in New York. And of course, this is where you can get more information about the Escazu Agreement. This is the UN website, the Secretariat, the Observatory. Then we have our Department of Sustainable Development website. And of course, if you cannot find any of those things, you can contact me, and these are my email addresses and my telephone numbers. And of course, this is us here at COP1. You can see me here, flanked by my permanent secretary. You can see David Barriola Marsh of the Escazu Secretariat, the ECLAC Secretariat, and you can see this gentleman here from St. Kitts Nevis, who also heads he's one of those who sits on the working group for human rights defenders, and a number of human rights defenders here during the time of COVID, because you can see us here with our masks. So that, in a nutshell, is just a little of the many things that we have done. There's so much more. And as I said, you can just download, go on the websites that I've spoken about, and that is right here on that slide, and you will see the amount of work that has been done and that still remains to be done now that we are at the implementation stage. So I'll stop here and entertain any questions that you may have. Thank you very much. And I will stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Kate. We really applaud the effort of your government, also of yourself and all your colleagues. It's really inspiring to see what can be done when action, because I mentioned before, my country was the first to sign, but we're nowhere close to what you have done. And so I open up the floor for questions for Kate. In the meantime, I think I have a question. So I know there is a lot of work. Usually government talks about capacity in terms of, their willingness to implement and starting the implementation process of Escazu. But why is St. Lucia taking such an effort in mobilizing and making this a priority?
Because, the environmental issues has always been a priority for St. Lucia, and it has gone from, in fact, our very department, the Department of Sustainable Development, was created a couple of years ago by the then Minister of the Environment, and who is now the climate change envoy for St. Lucia, that is Dr. Jimmy Fletcher. You understand? So even with successive governments have continued to make environmental issues a priority. And so because of that, the DSD, having been created to deal with sustainable and environmental issues. We took the lead, and not only that, P10, which is Principle 10, says that environmental issues should not be handled by governments alone. So whilst it is cross-cutting in nature, and all stakeholders must be involved. So even though we are government, you can, I hope you notice, and I hope Caleb, you following that we teamed up with all the different aspects of society that's intrinsic in the whole environmental process to make this a reality. So I think it has always been, environmental matters has always been a priority for St. Lucia, because St. Lucia, we depend on tourism. We depend on tourism and farming as the mainstay of our economy. And so we must have sustainable use of our environmental resources. I hope that answers your question.
It does. Thank you so much. And Caleb? Can you unmute, please?
So I keep doing that to myself every blooming meeting. But anyway, I have 3 questions. So the first one is, I had attended the VNR, the Voluntary National Review for the Sustainable Development Goals, and countries were saying, oh my God, we only have 7 more years to meet the Sustainable Development Goal. What do we do? Yada, yada, yada. Are there any lessons to be learned from the state's inefficiency to actually respond to Escazu, for example? Will they take, what, 20 years to realize they only have 7 more years to implement anything? They're very good at opening an office, creating a label, hire some people. They're not so much very good at getting concessionary financing to invest in what they need to do. So what are you observing on the ground with regards to St. Lucia being able to move from concept to actually investment? That's the question. The second part of this is, what are you seeing on the ground with regards to regulations? From the moment they've created the so-called Sustainable Development Goal, have you seen any examples of regulation moving at the speed of light? Or are they still working at the snail pace where your breeding moves faster than the idea of actual action? I'll leave it there because I think your response will be enlightening and basically validate my own experience and beliefs.
Christine, if I may, I'll deal with the first question first, and
Sure.
lessons learned. We've had a number of problems. Let me hasten to say that one of the reasons why we teamed up with so many different groups was because we didn't have a budget. So that's number one. We did not have it. I didn't have a fund that I could say, okay, I'm going to dip into this for me to do a workshop here. We had to be depending on friendly organizations and say, as I said, when the Ministry of Commerce was celebrating the business month, we tapped into that. When the Independence Parade Committee was doing the Independence Parade, we said, hey, can we have a spot here? So that was the way we can do it. So one of the lessons learned is we need to have sustainable financing mechanisms. And yes, we have a voluntary fund through the Escazu Agreement. We've been looking at sources for it, and I know the Escazu Secretariat, there was a working group seed into that. Mexico, I believe, was on that working group. So we know that there are mechanisms in place. But as you rightfully said, this is one of the things that we are very, very slow on. We have not been able to get the governments to contribute to the fund as quickly as they should. Mexico, in the first instance, gave a considerable sum to the fund, but the other countries of the Caribbean and Latin America have not done the same. So that is one thing. We need to do that. The second thing is that while we at DST have a coordinating mechanism, like we have a major list of stakeholders that we use when we go out, and that stakeholder group or the list is made up of diverse stakeholders. The problem is that it is not updated regularly. You understand? And so we find sometimes that when we are looking, when we are sending stuff to the person is no longer in that position. So that's another thing. We need to have constant updating of that stakeholder list. You understand? Because even now for that visit to the Escazu, the committee coming to St. Michel, I was at quite pains going through the list to try and find, but these people are no longer there. You understand? So we need to have human resources dedicated to ensure that that list is updated at regular intervals. And there are so many different things. Legislation. We've been trying to get our Freedom of Information Bill, which has been there since 2009, passed in the House of Assembly. Luckily, of course, we have our climate change bill, which has been passed now, and we are working feverishly on our management of beverage containers bill to take care of plastic pollution. And yes, we've also taken care of, we have our styrofoam bill and we have a single-use plastic, we have legislation and policy. But as you rightly said, we are going too slow a pace. Too slow a pace. Again, because we have limited human resources at the legislative drafting unit of the AG's chambers. So even if they want to do the work and help us, there is not enough manpower there to do that. So that is another thing that we need. And there are so many things. So let me look at the second question. And of course, as I said, these are not exhaustive. We can spend the entire day talking about all these. But let me go to your second question so that we can give Nicole a chance. And the second question is on the ground. On the ground, yes. People on the ground, especially when it comes to the Sustainable Development Goals. When we went, and I don't want to preempt because there is a lady in our department, who is the person responsible. She works with she's the one working with the groupings to ensure that the voluntary national review is done and to work on the Sustainable Development Goals. But we partner with her. As I told you, we went to Sir Anthony's Community College to speak to those students there. And so on the ground, there is an interest. There is definitely an interest in the Escazu Agreement, but there is still a lot of work to be done. Because one of the things that we find for us to meet those persons like the fishers, the farmers, we can't expect them to come into the city. We have to go out to them. You understand? And we have to speak in a language that they understand, a format that they can understand. So again, we don't have resources. We have to piggyback. And that is what we've been doing. So it's been slow, but I can tell you, we are committed to getting it done. And slowly but surely, it is getting done. Okay, so I hope I've answered your question.
Thank you so much, Kate, for being so open with your experience. We really appreciate it. Is there any other question? I see your hands up. Go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning. Are you able to hear me? All right, fantastic. Apologies for not having my camera on. There was a wonderful presentation on Ms. Wilson. I really, really admire it, and especially being in, I've actually visited St. Lucia a number of times. So it's really wonderful to hear about the things that you've been able to accomplish. I just have a quick question. Can you name any of the projects of whether or not it's environmental concerns or people's rights that you've actually engaged, the Escazu Agreement? And how exactly did that turn out? Like, were any of the laws amended as a result of that? Maybe you were fighting, I'm not sure if it's maybe a cleaner environment, cleanup, maybe the way that companies, of course, would dispose of maybe chemicals that they're using, etc. And what type of support as well did you receive from the Escazu Agreement when you embarked on this?
Okay, so there have been, thank you very much for that question, Otilia, and thank you very much for your very kind comments, which are well taken, appreciated. So we've done a number of projects, and all with the assistance of the Escazu Secretariat, because when we when we embarked on capacity building for the judiciary, the National Workers Union, the media, and the Bar Association, we had presentations from the Escazu Secretariat. So we had Carlos Miguel, who is the head of policies. I think he just got a promotion, so he may be something else. But he is heading the unit, the Escazu Secretariat, and we had the legal officer, Mr. David Barry, the MAF, who also presented on what the Escazu Agreement was all about, and as an environmental treaty as well as the human rights treaty. They also when we were doing our roadmap to get Danielle down into St. Lucia and to get the hotels, as I said, we didn't have an active budget. So the Escazu Agreement provided funding for the hotel, which the Bay Gardens, where we had that, you remember that slide that Danielle showed with the, when she was doing the roadmap with the SDG goals in the background. They paid for that. The Escazu Secretariat assisted with that. The MEA project coordinator, I think at the time she was working with to produce with some Canadian authorities to produce the National Environmental Information Systems. She's now working with CARICOM, but she has consistently, and that is Tisha, her name is Tisha Jabatis. She has consistently worked with us, and at the time we had the National Environmental Information System up and running, but again, because we have lack of funds, that has gone to the dogs, and we have now, it is no longer operational, and we are now working with a project, which is an ABS project, which is access and benefit sharing, that is to develop a mechanism for genetic resources and they are going to be assisting us with getting the National Environmental Information System up and running. We are also partnered very closely with the OECS Commission as well. This is another source, because remember I said that the OECS Commission signed an MOU for 3 years for the enhanced action of the Escazu Agreement. So we, from time to time, whenever Mr. Chamberlain Emmanuel and the Commission has projects, we piggyback on that, because remember the Escazu Agreement is an agreement that speaks to access to environmental information, public participation, and access to justice, which goes across all the MEAs. So when you talk about climate, Escazu is important. When you talk about biodiversity, Escazu is important. When you talk about pollution, so another thing that we are also partnered with is the pollution of the oceans. You understand? So that we've done with Mr. Tusi, there was Mr. Tusi, who is the elected representative for the public for St. Lucia. He developed a marine action plan and a strategy. And he also developed a framework for doing beach cleanups. So all of that, so we work together with CYEN, the Caribbean Youth Environmental Network, to ensure that we have cleanups through, the beaches, and we use those guidelines which were set up as to how to do it. So there are a number of projects that I can keep going on and on, but there are a number of those projects that we do, Ms. Richards, and I hope I have answered your question.
Thank you so much, Kate. We really appreciate it. And if any of you have any other questions, please feel free to use the chat. I know our time is going because the conversation is so rich, but we're going to go to our last facilitator, Ms. Nicole Leotaud, the Executive Director of CANARI, and also one of 2 Caribbean elected representatives of the public for the Escazu Agreement. From Trinidad and Tobago, and she will be speaking on the role of civil society in national implementation of the Escazu Agreement. Thank you so much, Nicole. Welcome.
Thank you, Christine, and thank you everyone for such a great conversation. And I am going to be brief. I don't have a presentation, but Christine, please feel free to interrupt me because I can't quite see the time. So I think what I wanted to emphasize, so the representatives of the public, Vishnu Tulsi and I from the Caribbean, Our whole role in the Escazu Agreement is to promote and facilitate, support the engagement of the public in the Escazu Agreement process. So we were elected a bit more than 2 years ago for a 4-year term, so we're coming to the end. And so, you know, what our interest really is making sure that the public, that i.e. civil society, is very involved in the process, including holding governments to account, as we've been talking about before, those very important points that Caleb made. And my overall message is that civil society, we need to be proactive in the Escazu Agreement. We are not to sit back and wait to see what government is doing. This is an environmental treaty that our governments have signed or still need to sign. And first of all, our role is to hold them to account, to advocate for our country to join if they haven't already, like my country, Trinidad and Tobago hasn't joined, Jamaica hasn't joined, Suriname hasn't joined, and Barbados hasn't joined, Bahamas hasn't joined. So that's for countries that have not yet signed on as a party, and for countries that have signed on as a party, the 8 countries, to hold them to account for implementation. So it's not just words, another piece of paper in the global sphere, but this means something. It has to mean something. So that's the overall message. Civil society, we need to be proactive in making sure this treaty is meaningful and helps the Caribbean ensure our right to a healthy environment. The second point then, or the first detail, is the first step, I think, is building a civil society movement and the solidarity. So the Breadfruit Collective and others have convened us, and there's excellent work being done by many organizations across the Caribbean. We need to work together. This collaboration is extremely important, and build our networks to reach those who are not being reached, so that this thing is inclusive. We cannot expect the government, we cannot sit back in our comfortable chairs and say, well, government, you need to go out and reach fisher folk. You need to go out and reach LGBTQI people. No. We have also a role and responsibility as civil society to bring our colleagues in through our network building. The second point is this, as Danielle said, by 2026, all countries need to have a roadmap or a blueprint or a plan for how they're going to plan to implement. So, more plans and plans and plans. But it's really important that civil society engage in the process of doing the national roadmap. And remember, once St. Lucia is completed, Belize, Grenada, St. Kitts, all in various stages of progress, other countries will have to do it. So we need to be involved, because that's where we need to see a strong commitment to inclusive engagement of all of the public in the Escazu Agreement. All vulnerable people, everyone who's affected needs to be involved. And that's where that commitment and designing how that should happen, that's where that has to be. Then after that, we come to the actual implementation plan. And the implementation plan needs to include support for civil society. It's not enough to have countries have strong laws and strong policies if civil society, the ones who are supposedly the beneficiaries of all this, we need the capacity to be able to use these laws, these mechanisms to pursue justice, to seek information. And so the implementation plan must have actions to build the capacity of civil society. But fourthly, my fourth point is we need to collaborate with governments. And Kate talked a lot about partnerships. So there is potential for civil society for us to collaborate with governments in raising awareness, in taking this forward. And we need to look for those opportunities, even as we know we also have to hold our governments accountable. And finally, I think what I want to emphasize is we need to build our capacity to engage. And capacity is awareness and knowledge, right? What are the issues? What is our legal framework? What is the Escazu Agreement and how can it help? We also need to build our capacity in terms of skills, in communication, in negotiation, in understanding and being able to use legal frameworks. We need to finally build those partnerships and solidarity. So I think all of this to say, you know, that we in civil society need to be proactive in terms of supporting countries joining the Escazu Agreement, but also implementation, because we do not want this to be just a piece of paper, just more talk, moving at a snail's pace. So we understand the lack of resources. How can we mobilize resources ourselves? How can civil society bring resources into the region, human resources as well as financial, to help move this thing forward so we all have stronger rights to a healthy environment in the Caribbean? So thank you, Christine. That's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicole. We really, really appreciate all your input. And I know there is a meeting coming up in St. Kitts. Do you mind briefly telling us a bit about that meeting?
Yes. So the meeting is, the dates, could somebody put it in the chat? I want to say 7th to 10th. Right, 7th to 10th of April in St. Kitts. It's what is called the Forum for Environmental Defenders. So this is where all of you, people who defend our right to a healthy environment as a human right, this forum focuses on how can we protect environmental defenders. And some key topics for discussion will be really how there is an action plan for how, under the Escazu Agreement, countries adopted. And we'll be talking about how to really implement that action plan, including things like capacity building of the judiciary, lawyers, enforcement, raising awareness about environmental defenders. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the situation facing environmental defenders. So one thing that's going to be happening in the next couple of years is there's going to be a report mapping the situation of environmental defenders. And the representatives of the public, what we would very much like to do is work with you and others in civil society to do our own documentation of what the issues are, what's really going on the ground. And the other thing that'll happen at the meeting is talking about this gender action plan that I mentioned. And really, how can we make sure gender in all its diversity and the vulnerability of all diversities of gender are really considered in terms of the role that they're playing in defending our human right to a healthy environment and their human right to a healthy environment. So the meeting's coming up. If you haven't registered yet, I don't know if registration is still open. I think Dillis has shared the link. We will be holding a webinar after the meeting as well to feedback to everyone what happened, what are the next steps, what do you need to know, what can you do. The meeting, I don't know if it's live streamed or anything, but you know, I would say we are going to feedback to you in collaboration with the Breadfruit Collective, of course, Christine. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Caleb, I know you have your hands up. We can go ahead. You can go ahead with your question.
It's a quick point. I'm part of a Latin American and Caribbean LGBTI coalition, and I realized that my people isn't even aware of the Escazu Agreement. So I was asking for a screenshot of the list of countries in the Caribbean who have signed on, because we have spent a lot, what was it, 16 years at the OAS, trying to influence resolutions at the OAS, and I think this would be a good time to get the list, since the next General Assembly is supposed to be in Antigua and Barbuda in June.
Thank you so much. And I would also welcome you to follow the Breadfruit Collective and Strong Caribbean Together Network, because we've been trying to have these information as accessible as possible and using social media as a tool for this. So definitely. And also this recording will be available. We'll upload it to our YouTube page and we'll be able to access the full recording for persons who weren't here for the entire process. In closing, I'll pass it over to Davia.
Sorry, Christine. Celine has unmuted for a quick question. I don't know if you have a minute to allow her to do that.
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, hi, good morning. On the question of vulnerable population, are you hearing me? On the Escazu, can it be regarded strictly as an ethno-demographic group like indigenous or socially marginalized by gender? Or my question is, can it be a geographically marginalized group? For instance, in Woodford St. John, where we are fighting against a St. Lucian company that is in the process of setting up 3 environmentally troubling developments on our doorstep. It is setting up a concrete batching plant, an asphalt plant, and a quarry 200 feet from people's homes. Boundary line to boundary line, 12 to 15 feet. These people already live close to a badly managed dump site, which was placed in a thriving agricultural community and is now a repository for all Grenada's garbage. Close by the sea, it is a repository for boat wreckage with runoff from old oil, not to mention runoff from the dump itself. It is also a repository for old tires that are periodically burnt to dispose of them. In fact, it appears that even on the part of government, anything new and toxic is designated for that area. Can we be regarded as a vulnerable population on the Escazu for these purposes? That's my question.
Christine, I'll jump in very quickly. Yes, yes, yes. You are human beings, and this is about the human right to a healthy environment. So these are the kind of cases we need to hear. These are the kind of cases we need to support. So thank you for sharing. Yes, you are valid and need protection as environmental defenders.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Ms. Henry. And is there any other questions for Nicole? And we promise this wouldn't be the last. This will be the starting of our engagement with civil society on the Escazu because we understand there's so many aspects to this agreement. Is there any other question? You can unmute, or if you, I don't see any in the chat. Then I'll pass it over to Davia. Okay, Mr. Robert.
Can we get a copy of the St. Lucia report? The plan?
Yes, you can. Yes. When you say the submission report, which one you were asking for, the implementation roadmap? Is that what you're asking, or my presentation?
Well, both of them.
Okay, no problem. Just send us your email address and we will send it to you.
All right. You want me, where I must put the email address? In the chat?
You can put it in the chat, yes. And you know that Dillis McDonald he has in the chat, he has given the link to the roadmap. So you can simply download it from that link that Dillis McDonald has provided. If you look in the chat, you will see where she has SLU action plan. If you just click on that, you can download a copy.
All right, thank you.
You're most welcome, but I will send you the presentation.
Okay, thank you. Also in the chat is the list of countries that have signed on or ratified. All right, so we'd like to take this time to thank our speakers for their instruction and leadership around the Escazu Agreement and for sharing and engaging with us today. Danielle Andrade Goffe, Miss Kate Wilson, Nicole Leotaud, and to our host, Christine Samaru. We would like to thank our partners and supporters in this campaign, FEMA, CANARI, and the Caribbean Climate Justice Alliance, the Breadfruit Collective, and the Marketing Aid. And finally, we would like to thank you, our guests, for joining us for this very important discussion on the practicalities of the Escazu and our roadmap towards the Escazu. It is an ongoing discussion throughout this campaign and beyond. You can follow the Breadfruit Collective on all social media platforms, and don't forget to sign up for the newsletter to gain updates throughout the entire campaign. Thank you for your time and for your attention. Have a great day. If you are in Jamaica, there is another event happening this week. at the Four Seasons Hotel this Thursday from 1 p.m. And the link will be in the chat. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for coming. Goodbye.